This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
This is Capital Connection. Fridays during the Noon Report, we give you direct connection to all that's happening in Albany and Harrisburg with the experts on the issues at the state capitals. They are Jason McGuire with New York Families and Michael Geer at the Pennsylvania Family Institute. Well, Jason, I want to begin with you. Governor Hochul promised to sign this controversial Medical Aid in Dying Act, a physician-assisted suicide bill, into law in the month of January. That hasn't happened yet. Do you know why, and what will happen once she does sign that bill?
Yeah, it's a little surprising because, as we were all told, it was going to move in January, and it has not and will not at this point. So we're waiting to see what will happen. I imagine it is just a matter of time, and that the legislature will get around to moving that legislation. But every day that we do not have assisted suicide in our state is a good day for those who are terminally ill. Yeah,
and of course, when she signs the bill, there'll be a 6-month waiting period, and then it'll be the law of the land. And Michael, you're talking about this as well. You hosted a webinar actually yesterday all about the dangers of doctor-assisted suicide. This is not law in Pennsylvania yet, but why did you feel it was important to address this issue head on?
Right, we're trying to get ahead of the curve, at least here in Pennsylvania, when we look at the surrounding states like New York and New Jersey, Maryland, facing these issues. Basically, we wanted to do this webinar, number one, to educate pastors, but general citizens about the legislation pending in the General Assembly about this issue. We don't expect it to move this year, but the results of the election this fall could turn the tide on this, and so we need citizens to be well informed to understand the challenges that are coming and what happens when a state does turn its medical profession into a killing profession. That's not something we want to see here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, in Canada, 1 out of every 20 deaths now, Jason, is a result of physician-assisted suicide. New York State is about to feel the effects of this. Wondering if you can wax philosophic for a moment or two and talk about what happens to a culture, as Michael mentioned, that normalizes suicide as a medical solution rather than a tragedy that should be prevented at all costs.
Well, I think culturally there is an overall lessening of the sanctity of human life. We have seen it at the beginning of life issues. We are now seeing it at the end of life issues. It puts pressure on those who are terminally ill for financial reasons, for example, to end their lives early so their families can have the life insurance policies that they may need rather than the cost of the medical care. It impacts doctors when they begin to see suicide as an acceptable form of treatment for those that are facing a terminal illness. So there are a lot of problems. I think of disability rights community, folks there that are fighting for their lives every day when they're struggling just to get approvals for wheelchairs and other durable medical devices they might need. Those are costly things. And the doctors tend to question quality of life oftentimes for disabled people. Many of my disabled friends just want to live.
Yeah. Michael, you argue, and you got a great article on your website. We'll give the address at the end. You argue that those who espouse doctor-assisted suicide is about managing pain. Completely wrong, because this is not driven by pain management. More seems to be driven by fear and loneliness and depression. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, we see this epidemic of mental health issues in our country, and then when we see, you mentioned about 1 out of every 20 deaths there in Canada being a result of physician-assisted suicide, or as they call it, medical aid in dying. And in many of those cases, it's, again, that loneliness, depression, and those sorts of things that make people feel like I'm just a burden on society. And then when you have a medical profession or insurance companies that don't want to shell out the dollars to provide the services and things that Jason just talked about, those things make people think, well, maybe I'm just better off dead. And then to have a society and a medical profession say, maybe you're right about that. Maybe you are better off dead is just counter to biblical principles, counter to what is right, and something, again, why we're educating people here in Pennsylvania about why they need to fight this agenda here in our state.
All right. Well, let's talk about the immigration debate that's raging in America. We see that the headlines in Minneapolis, but this is having a great impact as well in New York State. Jason, the Trump administration is threatening in February, which is just a few days away now, to withhold billions in federal aid because of New York's sanctuary state policies. How realistic is this that funding could be cut off, and what kind of an impact would that have on New York?
Well, I think the threat is very real from the Trump administration, but I don't think that the state is going to allow that to happen. It is an election year. There's a lot of bloviating here in New York, and people are positioning themselves as opposing the president. But at the end of the day, we're talking tens of billions of dollars, and that will have a negative blowback on the state. I think those running for office this year cannot afford to allow to happen.
Yeah. Michael, both Pennsylvania's U.S. Senators Fetterman and McCormick have called for investigations into these recent ICE-involved shootings. Of course, there have been a lot of pressure on the Trump White House to recall the Homeland Security Secretary over this. Given these high-profile deaths, do you think that it's time for the government to rethink how it enforces immigration policy in this country?
Well, the notion of removing illegal immigrants, especially those with criminal records, continues to poll at a strong level. Americans want to see that happen. How it is done and how it is promoted, with the rhetoric and stuff that is coming from the administration, especially from those like Kristi Noem, should be revisited. But it looks like there's a shift already taking place a little bit in Minnesota with some of the different personnel that they're putting in there. But again, I think, when I listen to Senator Fetterman and Senator McCormick, they're right to call for an honest investigation there. But even those two senators, Democrat and Republican here in Pennsylvania, agree that strong borders are needed, border security is needed, and we need to deal with those criminal illegal aliens that are here in this country.
All right, the debate continues. Moving on, let's talk dollars and cents, Jason. Governor Hochul last week unveiled a $260 billion state budget. Hard to wrap your mind around that kind of dollar amount, but it must be reconciled with a legislative version. What do you think are going to be the major sticking points in these budget negotiations over the next couple of months in Albany?
Well, the biggest sticking point is always how much to spend. And so there has not yet been an agreement in that mothership committee when those two houses come together and with the governor, they agree on the actual dollars the state has to spend. This $260 billion figure is just one that the governor simply has put out there, and now will be reconciled with the legislature. Keep in mind, that number always grows. It never shrinks. So you are not looking at a $260 billion. You're probably looking about 5 to 10% higher than that before this is done. That will be the biggest sticking point. The second thing will then be whether or not to put in some of the tax demands that Mayor Mamdani has been pushing for in New York City, raising corporate taxes, putting in a tax system that hits more people on the taxes. The governor's been pretty much dead set against that. Again, it's an election year, but there is a great push from the Democratic Socialists of America to raise taxes on the so-called wealthy. That will likely be a sticking point that will impact what they can implement as far as their agenda in New York City and the rest of the state.
All right, we'll see last year's budget, the latest in 15 years. You mentioned it is an election year. Does that kind of motivate them to do the budget sooner? Who knows? Michael, speaking of budgets, Governor Shapiro is going to take the wraps off his on Tuesday. That's always an interesting day in Harrisburg. What are you expecting his legislative priorities will be in an election year?
Well, Governor Shapiro has a key priority, two key priorities, I guess I would say, is one is being reelected governor. He's in an election year himself this year, but he'd also like to be president. He has his sights on 2028. He has a book out, and those are the things that motivate him. So I would look for him to present a a sort of a budget address that suggests that he's kind of a bit of a moderate, but when you get into the details on it, he's going to be continuing to promote things like legalization of commercial sale of marijuana as a tax or revenue enhancement, even though that damages the state, and to spend more money on issues like education and other things. So it's going to be a very much of a leftist spend more money kind of position, but he's going to couch it in sensible rhetoric is the way he does things.
All right, we'll have to watch and see the big budget speech on Tuesday. And if folks have questions about any of the topics discussed this week, maybe you're curious about this assisted suicide law in New York. Jason, where can folks learn more about New York families?
NewYorkFamilies.org.
And stay informed on all the issues in Harrisburg as well. You have a wonderful website. Michael, where can folks find you?
PAFamily.org.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.